Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I am Drew Armstrong, the executive editor of Endpoints News, and welcome to Post-Hoc Live. If you are joining us for the first time, hello. Post-Hoc Live is our show that brings you the reporting, the analysis, and the debate that usually happens behind the scenes in our newsroom. If you're joining us on YouTube and you are not already following us, you can hit that little black subscribe button below our feed to get alerts about future live streams, or you can sign up for the Post Hoc email on your Endpoints News subscription page. Today, we are going to be talking about vibes. For almost a decade, our founding editor, John Carroll, has been running a survey of biotech and pharma executives, and he's been asking them what they think about the markets, about government, about investing, and about science. It's called the Endpoints 100, and if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend checking it out. We'll have a link to it in our chat on the side of the YouTube page. Now, the great thing about this survey is that we get some very cool data, which is nice, but the people that John sends it to, they also spend a huge amount of time writing these incredibly detailed responses to John's questions about what they think about the industry right now. We publish some of those, we review others, and it gives John a real-time look into what people in biopharma are thinking about their world. The last few episodes about Post-Hoc Live, we've been talking about what we think is going on in the outside world. And so this is our chance to turn the tables a little bit and hear what the industry thinks. And the mood right now is not great. So, John, welcome to the show, and thanks for doing this. We're also going to be joined today by Senior Reporter Kyle LaHucik. Kyle covers public and private deals for Endpoints, and every day he talks to investors and startup founders about new companies, about where money is going, and what's happening with young startups. He also keeps these really great detailed lists and charts of databases and deals, which I find out about every couple of weeks when he writes this cool news story about mega rounds or about China M&A. So thank you for being with us, Kyle and John. I want to get started with just a big, broad question for you, John. I mean, you wrote this. The headline on the survey is "The Winter of Discontent." People seem miserable, but how bad is you've been doing this for a while? How bad and negative were the responses here compared
Yeah,
to years past?
I've never seen anything this bad. Nothing, nothing even close. It's interesting for a variety of reasons, and this is if you look at all the different responses, there are very few little glimmers of light or silver linings that you can find on it. I would say that it's bleak. And I think to understand just how bleak it is, you have to put it in context. You saw the boom during the COVID, 21 during COVID. It had an incredible effect, tonic effect on the industry. And, right after COVID, it bottomed out. It turned into a downturn. It was kind of a classic business cycle where you see boom and bust all the, we've seen it several times. I've seen it. I've been doing
Yeah.
this for like 23 years and I've seen it several times. A lot of the old timers have seen it a few times and so on. So that wasn't a big thing, but we're now 3 years into the downturn. And I don't think anyone expected 2025 around the midpoint to be like this. And as a result, I think it's really enhanced this kind of a downbeat mood within the industry as a whole. And uh, there are a couple different numbers that really kind of leap out at you about that. And actually, one of the most upbeat parts of this is the limited amount of actual impact that we've been seeing, because obviously there's this big impact that Trump 2.0 has had. There's a lot of fallout from Trump 2.0. And going into this year, I think that the general feeling within the industry, based on earlier surveys I've done, which is that they didn't want Trump to be president, but they felt
Right.
that Trump being president would lead to a better economic picture that would benefit biotech. So in a lot of
Right.
different
I, I,
respects, they
I
were,
remember this from one of your old surveys. They were like, we hate this guy, but he's going to be good for business, was the
yeah,
general
they
gist
were
of things.
voting against their interests, their
Yeah.
own business interests here. But if you think about an industry that's largely concentrated in Boston and the Bay Area,
Right.
hyper educated and things like that, this was not a Trump 2.0 audience. So when they got into this year and then everything turned kind of upside down, particularly with tariffs, I think that you saw a general souring of the mood, a rapid souring of the mood that came on top of this 2, 3 years of really kind of increasingly bad numbers. Where you've got an industry where you've got what 180 or so public biotech companies trading for less than cash. It's not a good thing. But at the beginning of the year, you could still feel this kind of like, yeah, the J.P. Morgan effect was there. You had a $10+ billion buyout with Intracellular and things like that were happening. So there were some hopeful signs of M&A and things like that. And then that all pretty much got crushed, and profoundly crushed. But if you look at the numbers as well, like what's the actual impact versus the prospective impact on the industry? The actual impact, how many people have seen a delay at the FDA based on, staff turnover and things like that? 1 in 10. That's not good, but it's not terrible either. 15% seen staffers that they knew at the FDA disappear.
Hmm.
They're about 17% or so.
Hmm.
But those aren't big numbers,
Right.
and they aren't necessarily indicative of, just because somebody disappeared doesn't mean that there's going to be bad fallout as a result of that. You can get through that, and I've seen some fairly hopeful signs that the regulatory side of this thing is not going to turn into a fiasco. On the other hand, there is this tremendous anticipation that this is going to get really bad.
Yeah.
What, 3 out of 4 of the biotech executives, mostly CEOs, expect that the reorganization of the FDA is going to have a harmful effect on the industry. So you see this overwhelming consensus within industry that this is going to not play out well. And it just keeps on reverberating through the entire survey that we did.
I want to come to Kyle. I mean, I have a kind of gallows humor joke that that every time I ask Kyle to write a story about, hey, it looks like IPOs are going to start opening up again, or the XBI is headed back up. The next day, someone pulls an IPO and the XBI drops 5 points. And so, if our readers are looking for someone to blame about the state of the industry, it's right here. And second is Kyle. But Kyle, okay, kidding aside, I mean, you talk to the people that are, raising money every single day, Kyle. I mean, and I think it's been really interesting because people in this business, I do think, try to be optimistic. And so, like you have to be, 9 out of 10 things fail. We all know, these numbers. We got a lot of optimists and people are looking for good signs. But Kyle, when you talk to people who are out there trying to raise or have just raised, are they as downbeat on things as, what the numbers in the survey would seem to indicate?
Well, usually when I'm interviewing, biotech executives about their fundraise, they're, super upbeat, super excited to get the money.
Right.
But
Because they just got $100 million. And so
right,
things are good
right.
for them. Right.
But on the flip side, they're, a little frustrated that it took a lot longer than it had in the past. And so, seems like a little bit of an arduous journey that they probably didn't want to embark on. But for the most part, usually they're pretty excited about the rounds that they've raised, but sometimes they'll, say that they're sad for their fellow biotech executives who are struggling to raise. And then you have the executives who are just happy that they raised the money and say that they're lucky. And they, don't say too much about the other biotechs that are out there hunting for money in their space. So sometimes they feel like they're at an advantage because they might be the only one, with that target or the only one in that disease area who can raise money. So
Yeah, Kyle's making, I think, a really good point here, which is that this is the crowd that wants to be upbeat, right?
yeah,
These are CEOs, they're running companies. They want to say, "Yeah, great, let's cheer everybody on," and something like that. So you have this, and I've seen this before in earlier surveys where there's this kind of like, "Yeah, well, we got some problems, but we're going to overcome this and get around it." So it was the level of despair that I saw that kind of took me by surprise. One of the things that really surprised me about the survey was the number of people that saw venture funding as turning significantly worse,
Yeah, I
because
want to dig into that. Yeah.
venture funding has held up, but it's held up with lower valuations and a lot coming down from the venture side that this crowd is not happy about. So I had thought that venture funding, out of all the different things, might amp up the responses there, but there was a very, very kind of downbeat expectation related to where venture trends are right now for the industry, and that took me by surprise.
And Kyle, you've looked at some of this. I mean, I know you track the mega round stuff, these $100 million rounds. And last year we were seeing tons and tons of these. And I think a question that I've asked you is like, are we in an environment right now of company concentration and target concentration and seeing more money or the same volume of money go to a smaller set of people and ideas, either out of fear or conservatism. Like, what's going on there? Where, like, I think if you look sometimes at the headline number, kind of to John's point, it doesn't look maybe that bad, though people do seem really worried about the future. But even last year, the trends on this weren't great, right?
Yeah, I think investors are less willing to spread their bets. They're, focusing a lot more on either existing portfolio companies or ones that they think will have the best shot versus, 2020, 2021, they're throwing money, pretty much at any preclinical company they were looking at. But even on the mega round front, like those have slipped this year as well. I think they're about 45 at this point last year. So far this year, we have 28. So even on that front, we're seeing less activity. And just being able to, participate in a mega round means you have to contribute way more money than you would in a smaller round. So that takes away a lot of money from seed stage investing or investing in Series A rounds that would typically be, say in the 30 to 50 million range. So taking a lot of investors out of the pool.
And John, I want to come back because actually I was just looking at the survey data and you alluded to this, but I think this is worth calling out specifically. So, for those of you who've seen John's story, and if you haven't, please go check it out. Look up Endpoints 100 and you'll see the most recent version of this here. You run this really cool chart that looks at year over year, this question that you've asked every single time: how would you rate the flow of investments from venture groups today? And people either answer, poor, fair, average, good, or excellent. And in these, even during the downturns in 2022 and 2023, poor never got above 26% until the start of this year, when it is the highest it's ever been. 58% of your respondents. And then not a single person called it excellent. And it's even still the smallest number of people calling it good. I mean, that is in comparison to the last, almost 10 years that you've been doing it, I mean, like, that outlook is as ugly as it gets. And were you surprised just how bad that was?
Yeah, it was. If you look at all the different questions that we've tracked for 9 years, nothing comes close to this. Nothing comes close to just the general feeling that things are bad and getting worse. And you see it across the board. There are record lows on every point. And I think it just really underscores just how bleak a lot of people feel that it is. A lot of people, a lot of people have been hanging on for a couple of years. They've worked out their runways and they've done this and they've done that. And now they're getting hit by a situation where they're seeing their costs rise because of tariffs. They're seeing this continuing decoupling from China on the R&D side, though not on the BD side as far as pharma is concerned. So you see a variety of different things that are going on there that have really kind of afflicted their particular business, and will probably get worse. And then just the whole notion that M&A, I mean, M&A had probably the best responses, right? Are we going to see some M&A? Yeah, we'll see some M&A. Valuations are so bad right now, you'd be crazy not to buy some of this stuff.
Right.
That's not really a reason to be cheerful about what's going on in biotech.
I want to come back to something you said, which I think this is something that's really tough for us to pull out in the data, but you mentioned kind of the attitudes around this administration, and a lot of our readership is in, San Francisco and Boston. These are if you look at the demographic profiles of our readership and you look at the demographic profiles of hardcore Democratic, or anti-Trump voters, like, that Venn diagram basically looks like a circle. And so there's a lot of negative sentiment about this administration just in general. And I think that does show up in some of the survey numbers. But how much of that, how much do you think you can kind of, is it easy? How well can we kind of disentangle that, like, I don't like Trump that much stuff that seems to be very much a through line with our readership, with their feelings about the industry? And when you look kind of, you referenced these past surveys where people said, hey, this could be good for our business, even though I don't like the guy, as a politician. How much bleed over do you think there is right now? Because we've seen a lot of stuff that I think, really has people concerned with RFK and vaccines, cuts to the NIH, defunding Harvard and all these other universities where a lot of these programs come out of. Do you think we can pull those things apart, or are they just so intertwined, based on the comments that you've
They're
seen?
very intertwined. If you looked at the response to like how many people thought it was a bad idea to get rid of Marx at Sieber, 85% said it was a terrible idea. We started the survey before Vinay Prasad was named his replacement, but you could see as soon as that happened, the remarks about Prasad began to come up and things like that. And then, like even today, you had the fallout from the recent announcement from RFK that they were going to take out the healthy people and children from vaccine recommendations on the COVID vaccines. That as far as the industry is concerned, that's like listening to somebody take their fingernails and run it down a chalkboard. It's not well received. They find this like counter to everything that they lived their lives and built their careers around. Where the data and the science point to is that this is something that you do and it has a positive effect, and that's the way you go. And now you have somebody who said they weren't going to exclude groups of people from getting vaccines that they might want, excluding people from getting vaccines that they might want. So you have the reality on top of the fears now that this is going to be a group of people that's not going to be making every decision based on the data. And that is something that this industry finds intolerable.
I want to turn to Kyle for another question here. I mean, John, you ask about the capital access question, and I think one of the things we see is that when people can't access capital, they run out of runway, they run out of time, and companies start to shut down. And I don't think there's anybody better at tracking this stuff than you have been, Kyle. What's the sense out there right now about the pressure on people to find a way out of this, either by, taking terms for different types of capital that they might raise, for doing layoffs or something else that's going to get them, longer runway and cut costs, or this pressure? I think we've been hearing a lot about, the zombie biotech conversation seems to come up every few months that we've been in this downturn, about what do we do about all these companies with negative EV values, and what should be done about that? Someone can come in and save them. And I know there was Vivek Ramaswamy's company is going to go buy them and turn them into crypto vehicles, I guess. But what's your sense out there, Kyle, about how the industry's dealing with this problem right now? And what are the type of trends you're seeing?
Yeah, the general sentiment I would say is that decisions are being made a lot quicker to shut down companies. We saw it this morning with Ideos. Just 15 days ago, they said they were going to look for strategic alternatives, and this morning they said they're going to wind down operations. That might be the quickest ever strategic review I've ever covered. And biotech, I've talked to one banker who said biotech used to be known as the industry of 9 lives. You'd do everything you could to try and save your drugs, to try and repurpose them, or bring something up from the preclinic into studies in a few years and try and raise cash for that to turn your company around into something that it wasn't before. And nobody's seeming to go that path anymore. It seems like boards are way more willing to just call it quits. And 3 years ago when the downturn started, I don't think anybody would have predicted 2025 would be
Right.
that'd still be happening. So
Yeah. 3 years ago, the attitude seemed to be, oh, we can just make it another 6 more months. I think the first Endpoints events I ever attended was, I think, John, you were interviewing, I believe, Neil Kumar and a couple of other folks about, surviving the downturn. I don't think anybody on that stage was betting that 3 years later we could hold the same panel in the same environment.
Yeah, and that gets back to the context I was talking about earlier, which is that there's been people have been hanging on for a long time. And right now it's kind of like, well, why? Why are we what are we waiting for? I will say this. The 9 lives comment, I think, is really good. It's a highly adaptable industry. It does know how to move on its feet, and it's really good about that. I remember, talking to one of the biotech execs during the when COVID happened, and he basically said, I spent a couple of weeks saying, "Oh man, this is really going to happen. This is happening," and then they got around it, and then they got in front of it, and they figured out how to staff a lab. They figured out how to continue their work. They continued how to very rapidly turn things around. So, well, yeah, I'll say it's bleak and things like that. I would say at the same time, if Trump backed off the tariff wars for just a minute, and would stop saying on True Social every 10 minutes he was going to slap somebody with 100% tariff if they didn't wise up, then I think that you could see. I think that there are the makings of a turnaround. But some things have to happen before that does. And a lot of that has to do with macroeconomics, which the industry has no control over at all. And I think that they've been waiting so long for the macroeconomics to turn their way. Everybody thought this was going to be a lower interest environment that we're going to be going into. Well, they come up with a budget that adds to the national debt. They're doing a lot of different things that the bond market can't stand. It has an effect, and it has people looking at this thing again like, how long are you going to have to try to survive this?
Yeah, Kyle, do people keep, I mean, again, this is one of these other kind of cursed things where I've said, oh, hey, write a story about how macro is turning around and so forth. And then, of course, Fed comes out and says, not quite yet. Um, what do you hear from people in terms of what they need to see in the broader macroeconomic environment right now for sentiment to change, either on IPOs or on deals or on investing?
Well, the main thing I hear is that they just want certainty in terms of, FDA leadership, who the CEDAR chief will be. They want certainty that funds are in it for the long run. And, not just picking their favorites in the near term. They want to see a few more bigger deals happen, things above 5 billion. Almost everything this year has been around the $1 billion range. And a lot of them have been private companies or struggling public companies. Um, and yeah, I would say certainty is the one thing that everyone keeps coming back to. But it reminds me at JPM, I would end every conversation by asking people what their predictions were for the rest of the year. And nobody wanted to give a prediction. And when people don't want to give a prediction, that's a pretty dour signal of things. So.
Yeah, that relates to something else I saw in the survey. There was something like 60% majority that said that they did not have a formed opinion about Marty McCary as the new commissioner. And to me, the key unwritten law in biotech is you never, ever, ever criticize who the commissioner of
Right.
the you just don't do it. It's considered stupid, and just asking for trouble, whether it is or not. But not having an opinion is having an opinion now. To me, that's about as negative as you can get, which is, oh, hey, I'm not going to tell you. I don't want to tell you what I'm thinking about. And I think that really, I think, just says a tremendous amount about the current feeling out there,
Yeah.
because the level of uncertainty in general is extraordinary. But this level of uncertainty about where the FDA is coming from and how Prasad's going to come down on this. You have to remember, I mean, Prasad's actually in a position of real power. He
Right.
can decide this drug is going to be approved, this drug is going to be not approved. And he can make that decision and he can push it through. So I think that, a lot of people are looking at that. They're going to want to see what these decisions are actually going to be. Is the FDA actually going to streamline itself in such a way as to allow for rare disease drugs to get through faster or not? Is there going to be a bigger, gold standard debt? Is that going to be a bigger thing now? So I think a lot of people are still waiting for the other foot to fall. But at the same time, there's kind of a dread because there's an expectation that it won't fall their
Well,
way.
John, you bring up something really interesting that I think is not yet settled right now, and because there's two things going on, and you've brought up both of them. I think one of which is that there is a lot of self-censoring that seems to be going on, or people just a reluctance to say anything negative, and even sometimes in private, which I think is surprising, or at least a conservatism about that. But then I think, and you brought this up, you alluded to this as well. There genuinely is an uncertainty about like what is going to be the philosophy of this FDA because we have things like, the actions on vaccines and everything that really worry people. And some of Prasad's past comments on approvals, and then you have cases where, Macri is coming out and saying, hey, we've got to really accelerate rare diseases and, drop a lot of these requirements and move this stuff way faster. And I know at the summit that we had last week here in New York at the FT, Tim Opper brought up a couple of FDA actions, that seemed to him very bullish in terms of approvals getting through very, very quickly and things like that. So I think there's both a acted uncertainty that we're hearing with people not wanting to say anything negative. But I think there's also a genuine uncertainty that people really don't know what this thing is going to look like in 6 months. And I think, echoing what both of you are saying, that uncertainty is making people really unsure about what kind of environment we're going to be living in here, which, again, kind of people don't invest, people don't hire. I mean, you look at the hiring numbers you had, John. I think again, similar trend. People really hesitant about investing new resources behind their companies right now.
Yeah, I've seen for a couple of years now, there's been this kind of focus in on 1 and 2 hires at a time. And you find overall that the numbers on hiring are generally fairly upbeat because they'll focus in on, I'm going to hire somebody, I'm going to hire an R&D chief, I want to hire a couple of bench scientists, things like that. So they'll focus in on that, but they're very much focused now on 1 and 2 hires at a time. They're not focused in on, the broader organization may well be cutting back far more staffers. And still need to hire a particular person based on some events at the company. So, but in terms of hiring and spending money in general, I think that they're still trying to figure out, what's going to cost more in the last 6 months of the year than in the first 6 months of the year. How does that have an impact? They're counting whatever dollars that they've got left in the bank. That's a very important part of this process. So I think that there's a lot of hesitation and good reason for hesitation too.
All right. So Kyle at JPM asked everybody to make a prediction and nobody wanted to. So I'm going to end things by making John make a prediction, and do that very unfair thing. John, you've been doing this for a long time. You talk to people in the industry all the time. Do you think, based on what you saw, in a survey and a data here, is this as bad as it gets? Are we near a bottom? Do we have to be at a bottom because there's nowhere else to go but up here?
Yeah, this is why I'm so interested in what the numbers are going to look like 6 months from now when we do the survey again. That's going to be, I think, the real, telling point. Going into JP Morgan for 2026, how are people feeling? Is it not as bad as they had expected? That could be a reason for optimism. And can they turn it around? Do they have some opportunity to turn some things around? My prediction would be things grind on for another 6 months. A lot more uncertainty, and that all points downward. So no, I don't think it's as bad as it can get. And I'll be curious to see which way it goes. But on the overall, I think we're going to see a lot of grinding ahead, and that's not good.
Well, I am even more curious than you are to see what the next survey shows. And I'm going to be watching Kyle's reporting very closely to help us keep an eye on things. Thank you both very much. John Carroll, founding editor of Endpoints News, and Kyle LaHucik, our senior reporter covering public and private deals. We are out of time, and that is our show. We will see you the next time news breaks. If you liked this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube here, and you will get alerts about future live streams. The recording of this conversation will live on YouTube. If you have feedback about what we're doing, send me a note. I want to hear from you. And if you've got a great idea for a future guest, tell me. As a reminder, if you're already signed up for Post-Hoc's email newsletter, you'll get notifications the next time we have a broadcast. If you're not, head over to endpoints.com. Then in the top right-hand corner, hit the reader profile link, then preferences, and click to activate Post-Hoc. You can also follow us on Twitter, X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Blue Sky by searching Endpoints News. Thank you very much to our producer, Nicole Wetzman, and our engineer, Dalen Turk, who make this whole thing work. It's been great having you with us, and we will see you next time.